In an article penned for the Radio Times, she opined that women in classical music still have a tough time making it big, but using your looks goes a long way to help. They're the hard-working artists bringing classical music to the masses. But according to Jenny Murray, if you want to be a success, you have to look the part. Writing in the Radio Times magazine, she said, despite the world of classical music becoming more female-friendly, the women who seem to be most welcome are the ones who are prepared to go along with the old idea that sex sells. She picked out the award-winning Scottish violinist Nicola Benedetti as being marketed in that way, as well as the trumpeter Alison Balsam. Well, with me now are Tanya Eos, Elspeth and Gay Yee from the group Bond, and Michael White, the music critic of The Telegraph. Good evening, everybody. It seems, Michael White, that the argument that some seem to be evincing is that by lauding these kind of artists who are attractive and so forth and make popular classical music, in some way this is a kind of dumbing down.
Yeah, and it is, but I can understand why it happens. What you have to understand is if there's one question that preoccupies everyone in classical music these days, it's what do you do about ageing audiences? And everybody I know is racking their brains about how you address this. One solution is that you invest in glamour packaging. And to some extent that works, but you have to be very careful. You have to be careful that you're not compromising what you're selling, and you have to be careful that you're not selling a lie. And the lie can be that the pretty person is not the best person.
And that can be the lie, because in fact in the case of Bond, they're all, these women here are classically trained. Are you saying the kind of music they're playing sells them short? Well,
Bond are what they are. I'm sure they're very successful at what they do. They're not my cup of tea, but it's not the end of the world that happens. I don't really want to criticise Bond for what they are, but
what you're saying, look, what you're essentially saying, and it's quite, because what you're essentially saying is that if you are, to all intents, what is generally regarded as being attractive, in a way, that's a problem, because that detracts from what you're doing.
I think it can misdirect the public. If the public are encouraged to think that the pretty artist is the great artist, then what happens to the artist who is short and fat and pimply and unattractive? That sometimes it's the short, fat artist who is the great artist.
Yeah, but sometimes the attractive artist. So, but wait a minute. Let's just come back on this, you two.
Well, basically, I think it is very unfair. The two artists who she's attacked are very, they're fantastic musicians.
Nicola Benedetti and Alison Balsam, yeah.
Yeah, and they're classical performers. I mean, we're actually a crossover group. We compose our own music. We don't call ourselves classical, so we see ourselves as another category. But I think to pick on these two, who just happen to be attractive women, is sexist in a way in itself.
So, do you think, are you concerned that what people say about you being glamorous detracts from your music, or have you made a calculation that actually you just go for it anyway?
Well, right from the beginning, when we started, we wanted to do something different with Bond, and that's how we formed, doing something that's a bit more of a pop presentation. And we just wanted to dress in a way that made us feel confident on stage.
And what do you say that you say you're a crossover group? Yeah. Are you concerned in a way that you're not playing what some people might regard as challenging music?
No, I mean, we compose and arrange and produce our music, and we're classically trained performers. But I just think
15 years they've been working towards this.
I'm sure they're fine at what they do. But,
right. Well, let's
beauty is not the issue.
No, it's not. But
it's how you sound which is the issue, and that's the basis on which you should be judged.
Yes, exactly. So therefore, when Jenny Murray talks about Nicola Benedetti, who's an artist who has strived since she's been a child, no one practices harder than Nicola, and she's incredibly talented. Is that fair or not?
Well, I think one of the other points that Jenny Murray was making, that there's too much pressure on people to look good.
But I don't agree with that. I mean, the most famous classical musicians in the world are not necessarily the most beautiful, but they still sell out concert halls and opera houses, and they still have a market. And I mean, this thing about an older audience, I mean, people tend to get into classical music as they get older. I mean, I appreciate it more now than I did when I was a teenager, and I think it's not a declining market. Everybody's growing old. We'll all get to the concert hall at some point, I feel.
I mean, I'm not against glamour, and I can see why it's a useful marketing tool, but I think you have to be very wary.
It's a useful marketing tool.
Of what the consequences are. Yes, of course you have to market music.
Yes.
You have to market classical music. You have to go and find an audience. And at the moment, you've got to go and find a younger audience. You look around a concert, and it's quite true. There's hardly anybody there under 40, very often. And what do you do about that? And yes, glamour and packaging is part of the solution. But it's a solution you've got to use very, very carefully.
But surely an audience can tell. Somebody can be, you know, as beautiful as the Queen of Sheba, or as beautiful, you know, and not very good. Well, and they're not going to wait and make it, are they?
The audience can't always tell. I mean, there's a very innocent audience out there, and they can be...
The audience can't tell.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit disrespectful to an audience.
Well,
and also, you know, everybody has... We've all had a lifetime of training, and Nicola Benedetti, she's studied very hard, and just because she's attractive, it feels as though you're
would you say that goes the same for handsome tenors, for example?
Well, I mean, in an ideal world, on an opera stage, every romantic tenor would be tall and dark and handsome, and every romantic woman would be glamorous too. But in the real world, that is not the case. You cast for the voice, you cast for the talent, and when you say you can expect audiences to know, very often you can't. Audiences are seduced by marketing.
Do you think it makes a difference if a man's
redirect
handsome
your
or not?
attention.
I think of lots of fantastic opera singers that aren't particularly handsome.
No, and when you go to a classical performance or an opera, you know, obviously opera has the visual, but a classical concert is about the music. You could shut your eyes, it could be anybody there on stage, and if they're not going to move you emotionally, then it doesn't matter, you know.
So maybe we'll see you playing in jeans, though, eh?
Well, we've done that before, many times.
Well, I think you've got to go and get ready for something, but now thank you all very much indeed. Right. And we have got tomorrow morning's front called Beetroot.